Are you new to League of Runeterra and looking for a strong but budget deck to start off with? Do you want a deck that is easy to use but will still help you climb the ranks? If so, you've come to the right place. Today, I'll be talking you through some of the best starter decks to use as a new player to the game to help you get up and running in the quickest time possible. First up is a Spider Queen Elise deck. It consists of 21 Shadow Isles and 19 Noxus cards. This deck has 20 spell cards, which is a lot higher than average. This is mainly due to a lot of spider-themed cards involving summoning a spiderling, so there's less reliance on having as many followers. It has a value of 18,900 shards, although in reality we'll be paying nothing close to this due to owning most of these cards already through the pre-made deck. This deck should be one of the easiest to put together, as a huge number of cards are given to you straight after you complete the tutorials. What I particularly like about this deck is it's got great options for both early and late game. On the lower cost end is Elise and a mix of low cost Noxon and Shadow Isle cards, including mini cheap spiders. This should provide you with plenty of resources to build Elise into her spider form quickly. There are several cards that involve damaging your own cards for rewards in return, including the only epic card in the deck, the Undying. This works perfectly with cards such as Glimpse Beyond, Cooling Sensation, and Phantom Prankster to take advantage of its last breath revival effect. Additionally, you can take advantage of deaths like this and your other spiderlings in combat to summon Valmor. The easiest win condition with this deck would involve Elise's level up effect, where other spider allies have Challenger and Fearsome. Buff your spider army using cards like Renacin Host and Brood Awakening, and weaken your enemy with Frenzied Skitterer for a devastating finish. Meanwhile, crowd favorite and Darius should give you some cushion late game to finish off the enemy Nexus if things drag on. The Freljord Ionian Elusive buffs deck is another one that you should already have most of the cards from the starter decks. The two champions in this deck are Zed and Braum. I've included 2 of each in this deck sample, however I would suggest 3 if you have more copies of each champion. The goal of this deck is to buff your elusive cards as much as possible. Green Glade Duo and Shadow Assassin are 2 examples of great early game elusive cards to hit quickly with. If the game is taking a little bit longer, then you can use the Empyrean, one of the epic cards that you were given in the starter decks. This has the best outright stats for an elusive card as of April 2020, which can quickly finish your opponent. In order to make your elusives hit as hard as possible, you will need a range of cards to buff their stats. Some great example of cards like this in the deck are the Inspiring Mentor, the Omen Hawk, and Elixir of Iron. On the premium end is Iverasan Halfguard, which is one of my favourite cards in the game. This buffs every single follower and champion in your deck when it is summoned, which can completely change the dynamic of the game. The deck also utilizes the Challenger keyword. Braum and Stalking Wolf with their Challenger abilities can pull in would-be defenders, meaning your elusives will have an easy path for hitting your opponents directly. Ionia has some great spell cards such as Deny to block spells, and Will of Ionia to pull your best cards out of harm's way to keep your opponent solidly under control. Switch between leveling Freljord and Ionia to pick up the few cards you need to complete this deck fairly quickly, but likely focus on Freljord for Braum, which is a fantastic champion that fits into many different styles of decks. The Zed Katarina Rally Recall deck is a relatively easy to use aggro Noxus Iona deck, which is also relatively cheap at only 17,400 shards due to the high number of common cards that this deck uses. The tough part will be getting multiple Katarinas, but you start with two Zeds from your starter decks, so all you need to do is level up your Noxus region and you should be able to quickly obtain her. You'll notice the cards in the deck actually have a relatively low cost, with almost all of them sitting at that 1, 2, and 3 mana value. The reason for this will become apparent shortly. The primary goal of this particular deck is to find Katarina early, power up to the leveled up form, and utilize her recall and rally capabilities as much as possible. Every time Katarina strikes, she is recalled to your hand, protecting her from spells that would otherwise damage her. If you summon her again, rally means you get another attack token, and you can strike your opponent again with her and other units on the board. Pair this with elusive units such as Shadow Assassin and Usari, which can only be countered by spells and other elusive units. This means you'll be a threat in the game real early. All these cards are cheap, so you can quickly get them on the battlefield and win the game as quickly as possible. Deny and Will of Iona should once again mitigate threats as well, hopefully allowing you to fully control that early game board. Zed and other allies such as Reckless Trifarian are also here to stack damage and make sure you're hitting the opponent as hard and fast as possible multiple times a turn, minimalizing the can't block drawbacks you would otherwise have on cards like this. If you eventually get access to another Katarina, add her to the deck, as it will be optimal with 3 copies of her. Midrange is the middle of the road for any collectible card game, with plenty of on-field threats in the form of followers and powerful champions. Alongside this, there are mighty spells mixed into the deck to make sure you have the solution for everything your opponent throws at you. For those of you not familiar with the term, a mid-range deck is a type of deck basically in the middle of an aggro deck and a control deck in pace, seeking to attain victory during the mid-game. The deck I'm about to talk you through is extremely budget at 13,400 shards and has a very varied mana cost, unlike the recall deck we just went through. Demacia Freljord mid-range is no different, focusing on early choices like Fleet Feather Tracker before building into endgame threats like Tryndamere and Garen. Big threats like Bull Elnok and Radiant Guardian can also swing for some big damage, and can be backed up by utility followers like Babbling Jerk. Cards like Back to Back can boost your smaller allies like Laurent Protege, and make them last that mid-game finish that you're aiming for with this deck. Most importantly, your strongest followers and champions are backed up by spells like Judgment, which can force a reset if used on one of your strongest allies to clear the field. In my opinion, Judgment is one of the best cards in the game, and it's actually one of the epic cards you're given with the Demacia pre-made deck. An easy combo of this card would be using Babbling Jerk to draw a higher power card like Alpha Wildclaw, and then using Judgment to wipe out your opponent's side of the field. This deck works around the Elite archetype. It involves constantly buffing them in various ways to make them withstand battle after battle. You will see this deck also features 5 Iona cards. I've included these cards as Iona has some great generic buff cards which fit seamlessly into a deck where you're simply trying to have better card stats than your opponent. I've also included Zed as this is a powerful card that you'll have early on in the Iona faction. Half of this deck has a mana cost of either 3 or 4, so your deck should hopefully start to peak in power in a ramp up to mid game. Due to this deck using elite other followers to buff other cards, there's a high number of followers in this deck, sitting at 32 in total. This deck still sits on the budget end at 18,900 shards. Your ramp to mid game should be fairly smooth, with strong early game elite cards like Vanguard Defender and Battlesmith. Vanguard Defender's tough ability makes him take 1 less damage, which is great for countering spider decks, where spiderlings with 1 damage are useless. This is actually a deck a lot of beginners use, so this is fantastic in that kind of beginner space. Spells like Radiant Strike should help you win those early game scraps narrowly. Once in mid-game, you can continue the constant buffering with cards like Vanguard Bannerman. This is actually a card that's dominated the meta in recent months. However, he has recently been nerfed, so he no longer buffs himself. To finish off the game in that kind of mid-game space you're aiming for, use your strongest buff cards like Laurent Bladekeeper and Jeweled Protector to buff your strongest elite like Garen. This works hand in hand with his regeneration effect. Once again, Judgment can single-handedly help you win the game if used on one of your buffed up elite. To finish, I just want to be clear that these decks are just my opinions on what I found easiest, and there's a high chance you may disagree. I've tried to include lots of cards from the pre-made decks, which is why these cards may be suitable for a beginner, but not necessarily the strongest decks higher up in the ranks. My question of the day is, what faction did you find easiest to get started in the game with? Please like and subscribe for more similar videos as we're heading towards the official League of Runeterra launch. I'd also love to hear ideas on future videos you'd like me to do.